good afternoon or salut from Paris, where IFOR is currently holding a conference on education in arts and humanities, which is part of our European series. Standing next to me is Professor Patrick Clastres from the University of Lausanne in Switzerland. Thank you for being here, Professor.
Thank you very much.
I hope you enjoyed the conference so far.
Unusual to have people from so numerous countries. It's amazing.
Could you briefly introduce yourself and what you do?
I'm a historian by education. I'm professor of international sport, history and geopolitics in Lausanne University. Lausanne is the core of internationalism for sport because it is where the IOC, International Olympic Committee, is, and also 60 sporting federations, international federations. So it's a huge place for internationalism through sport.
You just presented your keynote on the Olympics, which are happening here in France, coincidentally. Could you briefly explain to us what your presentation was about and why it's important to talk about it?
The aim of the Olympics is to produce peace through sport. But the problem is that you have nationalism inside because the athletes and the teams, they have national uniforms. And so, as some colleagues say, sport is the hardest of the soft power and the softest of the hard power. So there is no way, in fact, for freedom. And the IOC was under the threat of a lot of powers in the world, the states, of course, the medias, the companies, and all the conference was about this issue of how producing peace through sport by battling, in fact. It's like impossible, but we must try it.
Well, that's very interesting because I'm from Cyprus and our culture is Greek. So from a very young age, we're being educated on the Olympics and how they started in ancient Greece. And that's a big part of our education is how initially when the Olympics were conceived, they were supposed to be an event of peace building because during that time, all the battles and all the war would stop so that every nation state could participate in the games. So how does that contrast to today's Olympics? And what is the role of the Olympics today?
In fact, it's a myth. It's a myth produced by the International Olympic Committee because in the ancient past, in antiquity in Greece, the ekekeria was not in fact the end of the war and the battles. It was just a pass given to the athletes who were pilgrims, in fact, because they were praying the gods with their performances. So they got this pass to go through the enemies and to go to the sanctuaries where the Olympic Games were organized. So the war was still going on. And it's still the same, in fact. You have the war in Ukraine, you have the war in Palestine, and you will have the Olympics in Paris very soon. Of course, all of us, we are praying for the Olympics to be a way to gathering people. But what the history has shown to us is each time there are wars, the wars are poured inside the Olympics because of the uniforms. But I think the only solution should be to suppress the uniform, the anthem, and to have athletes representing probably only clubs or themselves. Then if the countries are proud of them, it's their way, it's not a problem. But during the competition, they are only representing themselves. And it could be better for the athletes themselves. They could not be the hostages of politics. They could be just representing the performance and the gathering of young men and young women. That could be the hope, and that could be the future, because before 1908 in London, the Olympic Games, the athletes, they were representing only themselves or the clubs. All was nationalized just before the First World War because it was the era of nationalism. And I think we must get rid again of nationalism in the Olympic Games.
You said that the International Olympic Committee has a big influence in organizing the Olympics and making it look apolitical and neutral. But you mentioned that we also need the IOC to be apolitical and neutral. Why is it important to have institutions being apolitical and neutral?
The IOC must build its future on the declarations of human rights and to be protected also by the United Nations. Not to be controlled, but protected. But it does mean that the IOC members must be like ambassadors. They must have this protection. And also probably the athletes, when they are in danger, they must be protected. And they will be the messengers of the peace in all over the world. The IOC cannot change things alone. So it must be protected from the powers of the states, from the powers of religions and ideologies, but it cannot do that only in itself. It must be protected, and the only way to protect him is to use the protection of superpowers, and the superpowers, there is only one, the United Nations.
Is the IOC advertising itself as apolitical?
Yes, the IOC is advertising itself as apolitical, but when you consider the pedigree of the members, they are not apolitical. They are quite all coming from right-wing parties in all its history. It is not the representation of all the world and all the ideas, so they must concentrate on sport, and for that they have to build the policy on human rights, freedom, and so on, and no more. And it's not so easy. It's not an easy job for Thomas Bach, the German who is the president of IOC. He's at the head of the world of sports, but he's confronted also to the world of states and the world of big companies and the world of medias. And he's like an ambassador by four. He must manage with these four different worlds. And it's not a so evident and simple job, of course, for him.
It's interesting how contrasting the words and their actions are. For example, the IOC has banned Russian athletes and Belarusian athletes to participate as Russians or Belarusians, but Israel is allowed to participate as Israelis athletes. What does this discrepancy signal to the people?
Yeah, that's a big issue for the IOC. The fact is that the Russians have invaded a state which is recognized by the community of nations. It's not the case for Israel. It's very formal, but the IOC is very formalist. And if the IOC is not in online with the formality of the world of nations, he lost all his credibility. So probably they have to change their way. But you must remember that the IOC has recognized Palestine as a team since the years 1980s, which was ahead of the United Nations because there is no state of Palestine nowadays. So the IOC was ahead on this subject, and but he must also be online with United Nations, and with a system of vetoes the situation is blocked nowadays. And the Palestinian athletes, they will come to Paris, and also the Israeli athletes, and probably the same for the Russian and the Belarus. And these ones, for these two countries, they will not have their own anthems. But it's not just about the Ukrainian war. It was also because of a doping scandal in Sochi 2014. The IOC has a long history of confronting with Russia and the politicization of sport by the Russian state, which is not the case of Israel or Palestine.
So in light of that, and as my final question, we see that the world is becoming very contentious. and it probably will continue to become even more as we're moving to like developing countries becoming more influential, emerging states. What is your outlook on the future of the IOC and of the Olympics within this context of contention?
Of course, all along its history, the IOC was largely Western, and now there are new countries emerging. It's not the first time. It was also the same in the 1960s, when the Third World was emerging. Now it's very different because the globalization has accelerated our world. But we must be confident, I think, in the future of the world, and of course the powers must be shared by all the communities, and IOC has to change its composition, of course. Perhaps we could have a future president for the IOC in 2027, I think, who could come from countries from the South. I don't consider the Global South concept because the countries in the Global South are very divided, like in the Western world. It's more about focusing themselves on the opposition to Occident, which is also a concept which is construct, which has no reality in fact. So it is about a battle of ideologies. These concepts of Occident and Global South are largely produced by the propaganda of Russia and also China. But it is useful for the countries emerging to gathering themselves and to obtain new positions. That's a necessity. But the best could be to build on the human rights references and the freedom concept for all the countries and all the peoples. If we could think about peoples without thinking about countries, that could be better.
That's very inspirational. Thank you so much for being here, Professor. Thank you.